Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Varlamore Part 1 Reward Changes blog. This thing came out today, and it covers pretty much the hottest topic of the current times, which is, of course, the Colosseum rewards. And when it says Part 1 Reward Changes, this just means Varlamore Part 1, not Part 1 of the reward changes. So I expect this is probably going to be a finalized version of what we expect to see from the Colosseum rewards. Now, we get some nice little pictures of some art. I'm actually not a crazy fan of the glaive just off the bat. But I mean, I'm sure it can be subject to changes or it can get a metamorph thing and stuff. So not too worried about that. But let's jump in. This is not a massive blog, and we're going to take it step by step. First up is the glaive. It's the big centerpiece. There is actually no news on the quiver at all in this blog. And I think that's fine because it seems like a pretty balanced item, and I think pretty much everyone is happy with it. And one recurring theme throughout this blog is that they have repeatedly mentioned the rewards are meant to be tailored towards med-level players. And by med-level, I'll try and define that a bit. It's about players who are starting to get into raiding, and are like, they're getting to that Slayer grind, and they're pushing towards the higher levels, and they're beginning raids, and they're looking to give those players items that are effective at that stage, and a bit beyond. The glaive is the one item that goes a bit beyond that and starts to work towards endgame stuff. But the main concern for all of this stuff was that there wasn't really a great place for anything for it to be used, and ultimately a lack of use cases is the big one. So the glaive has gone through a couple of changes, and previously it was, well, the way it works before this blog was that it was a ranged weapon, a bit like a ballista. I think it's 6 tick, as it says here. Deals 2 attacks, 0 to 50% max hit. And this effect is just to make it very consistent. That's the idea. And what they're saying is that the glaive has a groovy special attack. It reduces its target's defense by a percentage of magic level on a hit. Functions are similar to a T-bow, where the higher the magic level of the NPC, the more defense you reduce or the more damage you deal. And now, moving on to this bit, these funky effects come with a trade-off in terms of raw damage. And for example, the Dragon Warhammer, you would never actually attack with it. And that's kind of the point here, is to say that the glaive doesn't really do any damage because of this effect, and it's lackluster because of that. And so the change to glaive is, instead of rolling between 0 and 50% of your max, they're going to be changing it to roll from 0 and 75% down here. This bit in the middle doesn't really matter. This is like about this is a bit of a throwaway bit. But they're changing it to roll between 0 and 75% and increasing range strength. So this is the key part of the change to the glaive. Now, this will make it a better weapon. And it may be that it is a bit more usable, but without seeing the exact numbers and putting it down or simming it out, at least from what I can tell, it's still not going to be beating things like the blowpipe. It's not going to be beating the T-bow. It probably won't be beating the Bofa. Although, if anyone is interested in running those numbers or just happens to have a DPS calc that's customizable like that, go for it and put the results down below. I'm sure people are going to look at this over the next few days and come up with some ideas on whether it is actually going to do that. I suspect, though, it's not going to beat any of those weapons, and the only one it might beat is blowpipe in certain places. But if it beats blowpipe, then Bofa will beat that. And so we're not talking about a weapon that is going to surpass any of the current endgame BIS gear, but instead just does a little bit more damage to make up for its lackluster, damage. Is this the buff that I was expecting? Not really, but it is a buff. And it comes down to, I don't really think there remains good use cases. And I put out a video yesterday even about this, talking about some of these things, so this is a good time. But my main concern was, again, there aren't many places the glaive is actually useful. And unless they want to make changes to something like Olm's Head, in which case it becomes useful in higher scales, it still just has no useful places you can even use it. And it might see some use in Inferno speedruns, but ultimately it, to me, feels still quite dead on release. I don't see where it's used. The obvious thing, again, is that it will be useful in the Colosseum itself, which I think is completely fair. And if that's the case, we can make some assumptions, which is quite interesting. Because now they've not stated anything about increasing its use case or broadening that scope, I have to make the assumption they're going to make it useful in the Colosseum. What does that mean? It means that the boss NPC, and this is just like speculation at this point, the boss NPC is going to have a high magic level and be weak to range. What does that mean? It means T-Bow shreds it. And so, to me, that understanding of this is that range will be one of the primary styles for the Colosseum and will probably be the best in slot for the final boss. Does that mean T-Bow goes up? Maybe a bit. It's already really high, and for those wondering, that's because the Chambers update was really popular, and T-Bow is really, really, really rare. So there's a lot of people doing it, there's a high demand for the T-Bow in the content where it's good, and the content, despite being done more, just doesn't drop that many T-Bows. So we're in a position where T-Bow is looking really good right now. Might be year of the T-Bow at this current time. And I suspect that while it's not a range-only encounter for the entire Colosseum, it's likely to be a pretty dominant style. This is also no surprise because things like Fight Cave and Inferno, especially at higher levels, are still dominated by range with a mix of melee. Inferno is a bit of a tribrid thing at very high level or speedrun level, but magic is probably used the least. Melee has become more dominant, and considering they want to give Scythe use cases, and there's another reason down below in the Bladed Moon, it would make a lot of sense to me at the current time that the primary styles used are going to be range and melee, and T-Bow being effective. This doesn't just mean that mage is completely useful, far from it, and I think there are going to be lots of multi-NPCs in the Colosseum, and we know how strong mage is for multi. So, some very interesting ideas for things like Still Blood Barrage and Ice Barrage being useful, Venator Bow being useful, T-Bow being very effective, and melee being potentially a pretty big style. This doesn't say too much of anything new, but just putting the thoughts down. Moving on to Echo Crystals, this was supposed to be added to the Guardian Boots as a means to recoil damage, more damage, in an AoE. Oh, I think it's just an AoE. And this also screamed multi-NPCs. And what they've done here is they've removed it from the Guardian Boots and simply added it to the Totzketzil, which is the melee Bazaar Shield, and Odium and Malediction Wards. These three shields are all around the same kind of level and effect. They all carry strength bonuses for their respective styles. I think that's true for Malediction. And so they are all about the same bracket, as it says here. And they're shields, not shoes, which I think makes a bit more sense as well, since it's kind of like, a defensive recoil effect sort of thing. So thematically makes sense. I like that they've done for one of each style, and the fact that they're doing it for the things like the Malediction Ward as well makes me think there is some level of magic you could use for Colosseum. It may be that you could use all three styles equally and get some effect out of all of them. It may be they've tried to balance it quite equally, so that potentially Iron Men who have stronger styles because of what they've grinded have access to use that style a bit more, and a bit more freedom for choice would be a good thing. Again, not pushing too hard on the speculation for T-Bow and stuff, but that's what I would say right now. It will now give a +2 prayer bonus on top of that. It's nice, I guess. Nothing wrong with that at all. And that's really the only change to Echo Crystals. So Guardian Boots are unfortunately in the bin if you are merching them. I'm very sorry. But I don't think there's anything much to be said about this. It's an okay change, and I still think it's a bit strange that you would sort of want this, but again, remember, the focus of this is to have stuff for mid-level players who are maybe struggling at the Colosseum. They're not competing for the high-level glory and the quiver right now. They're simply just trying to get higher-level completions over time, and a thing like this may help that. Moving on to Sunfire runes. These guys got changed a little bit. I can't really remember the exact use cases previously, and I was expecting a bit more, but well, I wasn't really expecting any change for these guys, but if there was to be a change, then I was expecting a bit more. And basically, these are now changed to Sunfire Splinters. I don't really know why. Maybe they just thought it was more thematically correct or looked better or whatever. But it now says you can combine this with Essence, Pure or Dialt, and regular fire runes at the new Sunfire altar found in Valimor. Sunfire altar looks kind of cool. Interested to see it. Maybe some decent method of rune crafting here. Don't know how much XP you're going to get. Probably fairly minimal, I guess, but it remains to be seen. And it says the number of Sunfire runes per essence will scale with runecraft level, which is fine. They also say they'll be implementing similar upgrades for other runes in future Valimor batches. Adding minimum hits to standard spells is a reward space we're keen to explore further, especially considering Project Rebalance. And they're excited to reveal more of Valimor's unique relationship to runecraft. Runecraft? Yeah. So interesting. Not again sure there's much to note there, but cool. Sunfire Splinters. Bladed Moon. This was a controversial item, and still is. There's still some backlash that I saw today, let alone before. And this is an item that essentially is an untradeable offhand with a really big slash accuracy buff. It's the slash accuracy defender, is what it is. And this made no sense at the time when it was polled, because it felt like it was devaluing Scythe even further than it was already. And it would have made the likes of Fang ridiculously broken. Now that we have had Project Rebalance, as they state here, the intentions for Fang and Scythe are on the table, and so this doesn't devalue this doesn't devalue Scythe in the same way. Because Fang is now out of the slash meta, so to speak, as far as how it's going to function inside that, we can talk about the actual slash weaponry, which includes things like the Blade of Saildor, primarily at least. And there are a few other things, but I guess there's not too many for slash. It's mostly Whip, Saildor, Tent Whip. I think I said Whip, Saildor. Anyway, Whip and Saildor and Tent Whip tend to be the three weapons that come to mind when you start getting to level 70 attack and beyond, which is fairly reasonable. Prior to that, I'm not really sure Iron Men and the likes use. I guess a D-Sim is more or less your best option, and that's fine too. But again, they're mentioning we want to create an offhand suitable for mid-game players. Target audience for the Perilous Moon. And that's where this item drops from. It's not from Colosseum, this is from Perilous Moon. But it's a pretty big item, so. And the idea is that it fills the gap between Dragon and Avernic, or between Blade of Saildor and Scythe of Vither. It's just sort of making the progression level a little bit easier to climb instead of having this big jump. Previously, without the Scythe buff, I think this was a bit out of the blue and a bit too much, but with this in mind and understanding that it's for mid-game players from a mid-game activity, I can't say I really see a problem with it anymore. I still think there's going to be big backlash, but personally, I'll probably vote yes at this stage. They give a bit of reasoning as to why it's not a crush defender, which is fine. And again, it's about just making sure that progression is a bit more steady. It's also fair to say that pretty much a lot of players will never get a Scythe. And so creating something that makes bossing at that level a bit more consistent and levels the playing field is, again, a good thing. Moving down a bit, they have changed the stats slightly. There was a 3 strength bonus between the two items from Avernic and Bladed Moon, and now it's getting lowered, which means Avernic is +8. It still feels bad that the Dragon Defender is getting kind of hit that hard, but at the same time, there are plenty of low defense NPCs where you won't require the Perilous Moon Defender, and Dragon Defender will still reign supreme. So it's replacing a couple of areas where Dragon is strong, but considering that Dragon is ultimately a free upgrade that most people get fairly early, I don't think that's a problem. And here are the new stats if you care to be interested in them, and that is actually the entire poll. So there's some interesting stuff there. I personally, again, the Bladed Moon, I think right now I'm okay with it, with their reasoning, with Project Rebalance, with what they're trying to do and where it comes from, and the fact that it doesn't really devalue Dragon Defender. I'm okay with it. And they stated a few times in this blog as well, they will not be changing really anything at the high level. And I think that's true. When Fang was on the table, it would have done, but now it's gone, it's okay. So that's the entire blog from today. It's not huge, and it's not quite as impactful as I would have hoped, but it probably is final. Now, in 10 days' time, on the 20th of Jan, we have the Winter Summit, and I'm expecting the Colosseum release date to be more or less the first thing that comes up in the next few weeks, months, like 1.5 months from now maximum. So we will get some more info then, and I'll probably make another video if there's anything of importance around the Winter Summit, especially for the PVM side of stuff. But that's this entire blog in full. One thing I do want to mention, which I'm not sure I've mentioned before in a previous vid, is that the Scythe buff is not just a 15/accuracy. And now you're all like, wait, what? That's what it said. But hold on. There's a thing that says, in Project Rebalance, there's a little bit that says, we're going to make it so all hits that you do roll from, instead of 0 to your max hit, 1 to your max hit. And this means that you'll never hit zeros if you pass accuracy, which sounds fine, and it doesn't really seem like anything major. It's mostly annoying for things like Warhammers when you hit zeros instead of, and you passed accuracy. So you get punished for passing accuracy, kind of. It's just a silly mechanic, they're going to change it. But that applies 3 times to Scythe hits, which is really interesting. They put a little bit about it here, I think it was, about the Glaive. But this is something that actually affects Scythe from the actual Project Rebalance kind of stuff. And in a really big way. Because Scythe hits 3 times, this effect is multiplied 3 times. And if you think about just getting 0 to 1 max hit, 0 to 1 as like an increase by default, that is a max hit of damage over time. And Scythe therefore gains 3 max hits. It just gets 3 max hits for free from this Project Rebalance. So it's not just a 15/accuracy, it's 15/accuracy and 3 max hits worth of damage. Because Scythe scales a bit funny and it goes a bit higher, when you get to a certain strength bonus, you get 3 max hits anyway. That's not what this will do. This won't give like 3 max hits and an extra 2. It's just a flat 3 worth of DPS. And it gets better than that. Because Scythe chops its max hit in half every time it rolls a secondary and tertiary hit, what happens is the range in which it can roll gets smaller and smaller. And so the DPS increase from rolling 0 to a 1 instead is greater. And you can visualize this by saying that if your max hit is 1 and it increases to 2, that's a huge DPS increase compared to going from 99 to 100. And so Scythe is gaining not just 3 max hits worth of DPS, but even a bit more than that. And it really is quite significant. So that's the little tidbit of interest that I think a lot of people are currently overlooking for Scythe. The high-F tobbers know about this, I believe, and they've counted out and they say it's pretty good. There's still this thing where at P2, Shadow, Max Mage Shadow beats Scythe even post-buff. But that's also a problem for the speedrunners, and if you're using Scythe in Tob, that's completely fine. If you're using Shadow in P2, you better be speedrunning, otherwise you're wasting your time. That's kind of how it always has been. So that's all okay and still quite interesting. But anyway, that's the blog and a couple of extra little bits of info. Let me know what you think, if there's more to be done, if it's a bit I don't know. I feel like it's a bit lackluster still, but if the point of this is to aim it at mid-level players, that's fine. And maybe the answer now is to just accept that we get some buffs, we get a little bit more out of it, the Glaive gets a bit more DPS over time, and that's enough to really just let us run with it and more or less accept that's how it's going to be. I don't think this really changes the GP an hour of Colosseum, and that was my major concern, was that the GP an hour really wouldn't be up there. It really wouldn't be challenging anything close to 10 mil an hour. And to be honest, I still don't think it will be, but probably remains to be seen. So we're talking about a bit of mid-level content that scales into high level, as opposed to something a bit more like TOA that is effectively high level and is only really good at high level but scales down very low. It's kind of the opposite, which is an interesting take. And it may just be that that's how the team wanted it to be, to incentivize more of those players to get into high level. I think it works both ways. This feels like a slightly different approach, and that's okay. So that's all I got for you today. Yeah, see you in the next one.